Hello, my name is Mark Higgins. I am the Special Education Finance and Transportation Supervisor at Kent ISD in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Good morning. My name is Troy Hansbarger. I'm a manager in the School Consolidation Facilities and Pupil Transportation Unit, Office of Health and Safety at the Michigan Department of Education, and I'm the Director of Pupil Transportation in the state of Michigan.
We've been invited today to come talk to you during your Transportation Supervisor Continuing Education about the recent National Congress on School Transportation. This took place in May of 2025, and we were pleased to be some of the delegates from the state of Michigan that attended. It was in Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa. I think, Troy, you would agree with me. What happens in Iowa is told everywhere because there's not a lot of scandalous things that occur there.
Very accurate.
Yes.
Beautiful city.
We were there with a total of 48 state delegations. All 50 states are invited and the District of Columbia, and 48 showed up. So that was a really big turnout. There was a large ballroom at the Holiday Inn there that we all sat in, each state having its own table for a delegation, and each state having one vote on all sorts of different bus driver specifications that were being proposed.
And Mark, I guess I'll explain a little bit of the background. So I am I'm a member on the NASDIPS committee, and every 5 years, NCST has a national congress, minus 2020, which was canceled due to COVID. So we have 7 delegates from each state. So within our committee, it was my responsibility to choose the folks who attended the delegation with me, at the conference in Des Moines. So when I went through and I made the decision on who to include, I wanted to choose folks who I not only trusted in the pupil transportation realm here in the state of Michigan, but I wanted a very diverse group of people whose expertise was covered in a lot of different areas because as Mark's going to describe in a few minutes here, it encompassed a lot of different topics in NCST. So I wanted to make sure that we had members on our team who would be able to speak on all of those different those areas.
What I really enjoyed about the Congress itself was that this is really a 4-day culmination of what was sometimes years worth of work in terms of the writing committees of teams who are experts around the country in this field, putting together different proposals to make changes to what is really a 600-page document that is the National Best Practice Standards for Transportation. This is the binder of all of the changes that we went over at the Congress, and that's why it takes so long, because these committees have spent a year combing through each page trying to see if there's something that needs to be changed, amended, or added, which, since it's been 10 years because there was no 2020 Congress, there were several things that needed to be added to the manual for school transportation around the country. So it was a very fascinating event, and I was very thankful for the experts in their fields who were parts of the writing committee. I know 2 people in our state were actually on a couple of the writing committees for special education transportation and early childhood and infant transportation. So it was great to see all of those experts in their field coming together really with one goal in mind, and that's to make student transportation the safest and best way to get kids to and from school around the country.
Yeah, I would agree. My take from it was my first time ever attending. And I first want to go on camera and give a shout out to Patrick Dean from Dean Transportation, who helped us with our registration costs and made it so that we could go. He also was a member of the Michigan team that was there, so a shout out to him. But I also just want to add, as being a first time member, was how many different views there were from many of the different states. As we went through all of the different topics and things like that, we have our own views, for example, with just, our 7 delegates from the state of Michigan. But there were people from other states who were bringing up things that I hadn't even thought of. And I'm sure Mark would probably agree. So many good ideas that were coming from all of the different states. It really was a fascinating experience.
It really is. And I would highly encourage, if in the future any of you supervisors are invited to take part in this, I really do strongly advise you to take it under some real consideration. You're going to learn just as much at the conference that you do in terms of, you're going to learn more than you give back. It is a phenomenal place to meet up with other experts and pick their brains and find out what's important, and maybe things that were not on your radar become on your radar at that time. I think what was fascinating to me is just the whole concept of how it was run. It really was run like a Congress. We had explicit proposals that we printed off in advance and looked through, and at that time, the writing committee would propose them, read them off to us, and we would then have the opportunity to speak for or against. We had the opportunity to propose amendments. If an amendment was proposed, it had to be seconded by another delegation, and then the entire room could then debate the merits of that amendment. But right off the bat, I mean, I remember our very first vote, you would expect that there would be a lot of unanimous votes because it's all for student transportation, and there were a lot of unanimous votes. I think. But I mean, right off the bat, the very first vote was one that Michigan voted no on, and it still passed 34-13, which was on school bus having crossing control arms mounted on the front. So our stance was to vote no on that. And our reasoning was, simply put, the previous language said a school bus may be equipped with a crossing control arm mounted on the right side of the front bumper. We were fine with the word may. We think this is a good piece of equipment. If school districts want to have that piece of equipment on their bus, that's excellent. But to say shall was something that the state of Michigan didn't agree with, because given our climate, given the amount of salt and other chemicals that we put on our roads, sometimes those parts don't last nearly as long as they would in Georgia. And that's, I think, one of the fun, fascinating pieces of working with an entire country, is learning that we all have different perspectives as well.
Yeah, I agree. And we came to a consensus in the state of Michigan on that, just to Mark's point. Just the word shall is such a strong word. It forces people to do it. Now, he mentioned the landscape of Michigan. I honestly can't think of a more unique environment and demographic in schools. I mean, everywhere across the state of Michigan is just so vast. The differences that I see at the department between the upper and lower peninsulas, just in school districts alone, it's amazing. It really is. It's a good problem to have, but it comes with its set of challenges. But knowing that going in, it is very difficult to force certain, individual school districts to mount those arms on their buses. It comes with an additional cost, a very expensive cost, as you can imagine. So we knew that expense, expecting districts to pay that expense was the reason why we voted no.
And getting to that point, Troy, one of the things we discussed when we were there are certainly states that are going to take this entire manual and they're going to say, this manual is our law. This is exactly what the state is going to require for all of our school bus transportation. That's not necessarily the case in Michigan, though. Wouldn't that be accurate?
That would be accurate. And it was interesting, Mark, when I was listening to all of the different states, some states chose to adopt these recommendations as their law, as you mentioned. But at the end of the day, people need to understand that they are the federal recommendations. So as we were going through, that was one of the things that you really had to keep in mind the entire time, that these were recommendations that state delegates were voting on.
Perfect. Yeah, and we had some fascinating ones as well. One that I remember, the first time that they kicked it to what they called the Technical Assistance Committee, and this was a group of experts. Let me maybe talk about some of how the mechanics of this event works. We literally had 15 minutes to talk about each proposal, because these, again, there were 50 proposals on bus specifications alone. And so when you've got that many experts in the room, sometimes it can get very difficult to narrow down the focus to get an actual firm vote at the end. So at some point, they kicked things to technical assistance committees. And in one case, the first time they did it was for external lighting for a loading zone, which was going to be optional. But there's plenty of times when, even with all these experts, we really struggled in 15 minutes to come up with the perfect language. So we were able to send it to a committee, which that actually was a committee that Patrick Dean was on, if I'm correct.
It was.
And they were able to take time, not worrying about what was being debated on the floor at that time, but to really focus on that one proposal. And they could spend a few hours on it and bring it back to us later in the day. And I thought that was a really fun thing to do because, again, everybody in the room is definitely thinking these are some good proposals. We can't necessarily get the exact wording right, but if we send it to a group of, I think it was 4 or 5 delegates, they were able to really focus on it, and it was phenomenal. And that's how several things passed. I'll speak to something that failed. Again, every delegate at the Congress is able to walk up to the microphone and speak on a topic. And we had one proposal that said remote control external view mirrors. Previously, it said may be used, and the proposal was to change it to shall. And they explicitly said that this is going to cost up to $1,100 per bus as an additional cost. And we in the state of Michigan said, why? You can have a best practice, you can have great new technology that makes things better, but you can also acknowledge that a lot of times a bus driver gets a bus at the start of the year and that is their bus. And how often are they going to need to use that electronic mirror to change their exterior mirrors for $1,100 per bus? So we specifically came up and we said, you know what? We don't think this needs to be changed from may to shall. We don't think this needs amended. We just need to vote this down and keep the language as may. And I'll be darned, the Congress agreed with us. You know, Troy, we are talking with transportation supervisors here. I think it was a bit stuffy. Probably seems about the right time to lose the tie. Don't you agree?
I was. We all appreciate more comfortable, Mark.
Yes. Well, thank you. So let's see if the rest of this presentation can go a little more comfortable then.
Sounds good.
You know, as we were at the Congress, again, we had the opportunity to speak as well. We had all of these proposals before the event, and so we were able to go through each of the proposals and find things that we either agreed or disagreed with and wanted to speak in opposition to. One of them, the Michigan delegation did speak opposed to, was actually in the school bus specifications. There was a proposal to change on remote control external rear view mirrors. The current language had said may be used, and there was a proposal to change that to shall. The fiscal impact of this change was going to be up to $1,100 per bus, which that seemed a lot of money for a lot of districts that probably do not already have remote controlled external mirrors. So we in the Michigan delegation actually did speak up. We were opposed to this specific proposal. We asked not to amend it because, quite frankly, if we just strike it down, if we just vote this proposal down, the language stays may. And so with our support, that vote actually went down 19 to 25. So we were able to, thankfully, use the state of Michigan as an example to encourage the rest of the nation that we don't always have to buy the new electrical equipment if you have one bus driver who's driving a bus all year long, and that mirror probably doesn't need to move much at all, if any. Mm-hmm. So we're very proud of the fact that, you know, we did our homework and we had a lot of it. So thank you, Troy, for assigning us this homework.
Yes.
One of the things that I found very fun was the last one in the school bus specifications was a 14-page proposal on something that most of the people in the room agreed, we don't know much of anything about this. And that was putting minimum sound requirements for electric school buses. I mean, there were formulas in this proposal with sigmas in them, for goodness sakes.
Like Mark says, I didn't know much about this one either. I hadn't heard much about it, so this was interesting to say the least to hear of this one.
What was fun, though, I think, is again, we were able to lean on the experts. Part of these writing committees did actually include bringing in the manufacturers who knew what the standards were at a national level, who knew what they were building towards, and they were able to really give us some guidance that allowed this very in-depth and very technical proposal to pass 40-1. So there were 7 delegations that didn't even want to go on the record as saying whether they support or oppose it. But nonetheless, it was a fantastic, again, experience to learn from the experts in the field that, yes, there's a reason why we need to put some sound on these buses that are electric. Because when they go at a lower speed, all of a sudden, no one can hear them coming. So if our students are not paying attention, or maybe even have some earbuds in, I don't know if you've seen any kids with earbuds in these days, but apparently it's all the rage. Nonetheless, this was a really nice safety measure to put into place so that these buses, despite not having a diesel engine, are going to make some noise and are going to allow people to know that they're coming along.
Yeah.
Some of the other changes that were made, I found to be very interesting and maybe even ever so slightly controversial. One of our fellow delegations on one of the proposals was to change routing and scheduling. The proposal was that our routing teams now needed to base their school bus routes around information on road conditions, railroad crossings. That was always in it. But the proposal was to add location of sexual predators. And that's an interesting addition. I think we can all agree that we definitely want to keep our students away from sexual predators at all times.
Yeah, I agree. This one was one of the more difficult ones to look at because it's almost like you don't want to be on record of voting against it, right? Because no one wants their students being in an area of potential sexual predators. However, when you look at the other side of it and we talk about potential sexual predators, we have a lot of cities here in the United States, some of the bigger cities, for example, that when you're talking potential, you could literally be miles and miles away from a child's stop, for example, looking for alternative routes. It just didn't seem very feasible for bus drivers to be able to manage.
Yes, I would agree, and our delegation actually did concur with the amendment to strike this, and it took a lot of very good and solid debate where, again, we all agree we want to keep the kids safe, but we all also have to agree there's a practical matter of we have to pick up the kids where they are. Some of these students specifically have curb-to-curb transportation. I, as a school bus operation, cannot determine who lives 3 houses down from you. Absolutely. It's not necessarily within our purview. So it was a very interesting and spirited discussion. The amendment to strike it did pass, and then the entire proposal did pass, which, again, that's why it's fantastic to bring together such a large group of people who were willing and able to discuss these changes and the practical effects of them. Another one that we actually did make an amendment on, and it did pass the entire proposal, was within school bus specifications. There was a proposal to add a section that specifically stated climate control shall be installed that includes heating and cooling, and this was for all buses. The Michigan delegation basically went up in front of the entire Congress and stated, we live in a very large nation with a very wide range of climates. It does not make sense that we are forcing all buses to have heating and air conditioning, and therefore we made a proposed amendment from shall to may. That proposal passed 37-7, and then the entire proposal passed 44-1.
Yeah, and Mark, it basically, I mean, again, we talk about expenses, right? So obviously there are expenses that a lot of our school districts here in the state of Michigan are, they're unable to afford. But honestly speaking, some of those may not even be necessary, right? Depending on the climate that we're in, for example, we may not need to have certain functions of air conditioning, such as, for example, forcing districts to do so would be a very difficult slope to be on.
Which again was something that we brought up and many of our fellow northern states concurred with. And to be honest with you, I thought we might have more of our southern states concurring because they might not heating. But, they get ice storms, so we get warmth, whatever. Everybody wins in the end, and we keep our kids safe.
That is true.
So you had mentioned earlier that we, apparently a few people got sick in 2020 and we didn't have this.
Yeah, I did hear about that.
So with that, it had been 10 years since we had a full-on Congress. And as such, there were a lot of new things that needed to be addressed. For starters, and this was one that we actually had a lot to talk about from the Michigan delegation, was alternative transportation. I think many supervisors around the state are seeing that we have various providers who are stepping into this space who are willing to come in, walk alongside a school district as a partner and say, hey, we know you have routes that are challenging, that maybe are one-offs, that would be better off if it wasn't necessarily a school bus, but perhaps a van transportation coming in, and we can provide that service. And I think a lot of school districts have benefited from that. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree. And this is another example of a very difficult issue. Because I will never, you will never hear me go on camera or see anything in writing from me that ever encourages anything other than the use of a school bus, Mark. It is by far the safest way to travel. The data backs that up. However, on the flip side of that, the uniqueness that we have here in the state of Michigan, some districts, we realize we have to be a little open-minded to understand that they have specific needs that might require them to seek a different type of transportation.
Absolutely. And I think one of the big considerations that I see in a lot of the literature and a lot of the districts agree with is certain students like those McKinney-Vento students who are coming across a couple of different school districts. And so there's not really a bus route in place. So there are definitely certain situations where school districts have found and benefited from this. And this was a section that was one of the last ones that was discussed, but it took a lot of discussion because this was an entirely brand new section of the entire Congress.
It was, and there were parts of it that got contentious at times.
Yes, there were.
Just because there's so many different aspects of safety that come into play when we're talking about school transportation vehicles and alternate transportation. So it got a little testy at times.
And one of the amendments that was actually proposed by Michigan right in the very beginning of the proposal was it talked about having an agreement between a school and a third party. And we actually proposed we need that language to actually say this needs to be a written agreement, not just an agreement, because we have certain deliverables that we are expecting that third party is going to do. And if we don't have them written in a contract, it's harder to hold them to that level of standard.
Yes.
One of the things we did discuss is the fact that on these vehicles, the National Congress had proposed treating these vehicles much like a full-on school bus. We had actually proposed recognizing that some of this transportation does happen in smaller passenger-sized vehicles, and the need of having a fire extinguisher that was specifically mounted in a bracket might be a little bit of overkill in that. But we were not supported in that endeavor. So again, that's the fun thing about the Congress is everybody can have an opinion. We can share that opinion, and we can accept the fact that maybe the rest of the country doesn't agree with us.
That is true.
And that's okay. We're strong people, and we'll get by. One of the sections that I think was very interesting that a state delegation proposed that did not receive a lot of support was in that 12 to 15 passenger van category.
Yes, sir.
Do you remember State of Iowa's discussion on that?
I do remember when you say it wasn't very well supported. It literally had one vote,
Yes.
voting for the inclusion of 12 to 15 passenger vans. That state, and I'm sure there are some other folks here in the state of Michigan who may feel the same way, but they just don't feel that the current law of the 10 passengers or less have enough seating capacity to physically manage their needs and things like that. But we figure here in the state of Michigan overall, Mark, I know you agree with me here that we the Michigan Department of Education already has a guidance on our website because it's not in state law, for example, that they can't use these 10 or fewer passenger vehicles. We want people using school buses, right? So because it's the safest way to travel, I already mentioned that, but I feel like we're already giving some when it comes to the 10 or fewer passenger vehicles. The department sees that if we start opening it up to allow for even more passengers, our school bus inspection team is not able to inspect those vehicles, which leaves us in a very, it's a safety issue is what it is. The drivers don't have to go through the proper training that our school bus drivers go through. It just scares me. It does. If we start looking into 12 to 15 passenger vehicles, I never want to go down that road.
And I think the Congress agreed with you. There was
Luckily, they did.
There was some
Yes.
very spirited discussion. One of the fantastic things about the Congress is seeing the makeup of every state's delegation, and a handful of states brought along a state trooper with them, and we had several of those state troopers actually come up and start speaking on behalf of the fact that when they see those 12 to 15 passenger vans, they've had to go to far too many families and tell them that they lost family members to accidents in those because of the safety specifications and the roll cages compared to what you would see in a school bus that is probably not even going to roll nearly as easily as a van. So again, it's fantastic that everybody gets an opportunity to bring their proposals to the floor, and it's a great way to find out what really are the priorities for safety around the country. So we had 3.5 days in Iowa going over a lot of different proposals. One of them that, again, created a very spirited discussion. One of the state delegations specifically asked that, could we include in the list of training for all drivers, diversity training in 2025?
It was interesting to hear that one because as Mark pointed out while we were at the Congress, have you flipped on the news lately? We do know that it is a very hot topic at the federal level right now. And while a lot of people out there agree that, diversity, equity, inclusion is important in the schools and in the communities and elsewhere, Michigan as a whole just felt like it probably wasn't the best time to go with that one right now with funding on the line and so forth, that we figured our drivers probably didn't need that right now.
No, unfortunately, I would agree with that. Regardless of what anybody's personal feelings were in that room, and there were some very passionate personal feelings expressed within that room, at the end of the day, we were also there representing the states that were on the names of our tables. And after that proposal was voted down, and as you said, I pointed it out in the Congress, I had several states come up to me and thank me because they said my governor would kill me if I came back and said we added diversity training for all bus drivers. It's just not a wise time to make a proposal like that when we all know that there are certain levels of federal funding that come with education. So,
and even more than that, Mark, it's not even just about all the changes that are going on in the federal government and how they're viewing the DEI things. It's more so our drivers already do a lot of ample, well thought out training already. So in a lot of cases, if we're trying to stack other things on top of it, such as DEI, it might become overwhelming for some of our drivers.
absolutely. I mean, as we're here right now, this is part of mandatory training for all of our supervisors each year. We have a certain amount of hours that are already filled up with very important topics that are hitting on their day-to-day job. And quite frankly, I do believe a lot of our drivers already do a lot of work to build relationships with all of their students on their bus, regardless of race, ethnicity, or social background.
I completely agree.
So the best of intentions sometimes still need to be left out of official documents that the entire country is voting on. And that was the end of that discussion. There was a very large section on special education. It was not necessarily put into small bits, but we had an entire package that we were looking over for a lot of changes. And there were several in there that really had some longer discussions and some debates. I think right off the top of my head, service animals was something that had a lot of discussion, because I don't know about you, Troy, but I'm seeing a lot more Pomeranians with a service vest on them in a Walmart cart these days.
They have become very commonplace. In fact, at the gym the other day, I almost got tripped up by a dog trying to do tricep extensions. So yes, they are everywhere.
Yes. I think we are happy to announce that at the Congress, it was agreed upon that the language specifically around service animals was going to clearly define that these are service animals under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So there needs to be a certain level of training, certain expectations for the animal's behavior on the bus, and also some guidance that if an animal does not meet those expectations and is causing problems with the other students, that conversations can be held with the family regarding the actual level of training within that animal.
Yeah, I think bottom line, Mark, is that there's criteria that needs to be met with service animals. I'm going to be the first to tell you, and that's coming from a dog lover, for example. I love service animals. I think that they do a lot of good for a lot of people in the community. I would never discourage that, but when we are talking about special education students, there needs to be a documented need for those animals.
100% agree. And so we're grateful that indeed the Congress agreed with that we are going to keep these level of standards. Another topic that is near and dear to Michigan's heart that was discussed during the special needs transportation was the fact that there is some transportation for students beyond the age of 22 and in post-graduation era. And for the state of Michigan, as we all know, we educate students with an IEP up to age 26 if they need that. If they cannot graduate with a diploma or a certificate of completion before that, they have a right that our schools do indeed have to continue to maintain.
Yeah, that is accurate. In fact, I can tell you that when we completed our transportation expenditure report reviews for transportation reimbursement, we encountered quite a few districts who were transporting special education students that, for example, 23 years old or something like that, to job sites, for example, life skills places, college prep in some areas. So yeah, there's a lot of that transportation of some of those older students.
Because as we know, the federal IDEA only goes up to age 21, but our students from 22 to 26 still have that right and obligation to learn those transition skills, as you said, in the community, in those work sites. And so we're very grateful that indeed that was acknowledged within this document, that not all students are children. Sometimes students are just students. They are still within your educational setting because they have that obligation and right. And so we're glad that that was put in there. One fascinating topic that I think the state of Michigan had some opinions upon was there was some proposed changes to student responsibilities, guidelines on what we would tell the families the student is responsible for, and talking about how maintaining proper student behavior is crucial, as a distracted driver can lead to unsafe situations. So it really talked about reminding these students that inappropriate behavior would have consequences and that ridership is a privilege. But getting back to as we were just discussing, these students with an IEP, these students in special education, they actually, this is not a privilege for them, is it, Troy?
No, it's not. It is a right by law. These children are protected, and as they should be, in a myriad of ways, transportation being one of them. Now, student behavior, obviously we have a lot of drivers out there, for example, who have dealt with, behavior problems, whether it be a regular education student, special education student. I'm sure they've encountered many of those behavior problems. And if behavior comes to a point where it causes an unsafe environment, either for the rest of the students on the bus and or the driver, the bus driver or transportation department or school district in its whole has the ability to be able to suspend a child off of a bus, even if it is a child with an IEP, but must have that understanding that they aren't treated the same, right? So they have to make sure that they take into account. One perfect example is if any days that a special education student is suspended off of a bus, that also counts as days being suspended from school. Those culminate in a number of days, as you well know, Mark. You get up to a certain level of suspension days, and then we have manifestation meetings and things like that. So just pointing out that it's a very, very gray area. So when we get into this privilege versus right, we have to be careful, because in some cases it is a right, although that right can be revoked in certain circumstances. School districts better be very careful in doing their due diligence and making sure that they're following through with the law.
And in fact, that's one of the reasons why we supported one of the amendments that was proposed for this. And in that language that was brought up for the proposed change, we supported adding, when they talk about who has to be involved in making a decision for removing a student from transportation, we supported an amendment that added includes the IEP team, because those are the stakeholders who know that child, who know whether this is a manifestation of their disability or if this is some other reason that would necessitate removing them from transportation. And even in that situation, they should probably at that point start looking at different types of transportation for that student, because again, we need to make sure they're showing up to school.
Absolutely. IEP is at the forefront of everything, right? It's the backbone of the entire operation, the whole system. It all revolves around the IEP team. Now, I can tell you with our reporting documents at the department, we are focusing a lot of the transportation of special education students to be more IEP based. In the past, it's always just been, students with an IEP, for example, would be a special education student in regards to transportation. But we are starting to make it a little bit more specific to the part where in that IEP, that specialized transportation has to be in that IEP. But to your point, that's where the IEP team, the folks who know that child more than anyone else, can make those modifications, accommodations in that IEP to make sure that their needs are met, no matter what.
So again, very proud of the work we did and supported while we were there in Iowa. So as we're looking at some of the other proposals that were brought to the Congress and were accepted, specifically when we looked at the specially equipped school bus specification section, there were two that I think stood out both for you and I and for a few other members of our delegation. In one, we changed a shall to a may to a shall, which does sound like one word is not a big deal, but when you were proposing in the past that you may have a second handrail on your school bus entrance, and you change that to a shall, it's kind of a big impact. Wouldn't you agree, Troy?
It is impact, Mark. Why don't you explain to the group why we think it's essential to have the two rails as opposed to one?
So what we found and what was discussed very heavily at the Congress was it's easy to have that one handrail not be adequate. You can have students who maybe do not have use of one side of their body. You can maybe have a student who is in the way of the handrail when an attendant or driver is trying to help load that student up. The second handrail is really giving a lot of support to anybody who's walking up that's going to need a handrail and maybe cannot access just one handrail. It seems like a very simple change, and yet for some of these students and some of these drivers and school bus transportation personnel, this is going to be very impactful to their everyday jobs.
Yeah, I would agree. So when we're talking about educational professionals, such as me, Mark, at the department, you and your work at Kent ISD, especially looking out for, a lot of special education students, specially equipped buses, and so forth. What we tend to do is we tend to look at a lot of the measures that we have, safety things that we have on school buses, and we really have to ask ourselves, is this sufficient enough? Are there situations out there to where this could be a hazard for certain students? Do we have people out there that wouldn't be able to access the bus in a way that they should? So I almost feel like we're responsible for almost looking at things in a backwards way, to where we're trying to reach every possible student loading and unloading a bus.
And not only hazards, but perhaps it's a hindrance if we don't have it. Like maybe we weren't creating a hazard situation, but we're opening up opportunities for access as long as we're providing just a little extra push.
Yes. Yeah.
Also in that section, very small, minor detail, I would say, but nonetheless impactful in that we change the standard that the oxygen tanks that are being transported, previously referred to AMD standard 003, now we're referring to an SAE standard of 3043. So again, we're just looking at little language changes, but nonetheless, this gives you an example of the fact that this is an enormous book. It's been written over years and years, and the federal standards on these sort of requirements changes all the time. And we need to have experts in the field who are paying attention to say, oh no, you're citing a standard that was written in, and I don't know when this was written, but it was written 20 years ago and now it's been updated. So we want to make sure that that updated language is being addressed within this, so that, again, with oxygen in particular, that's a pretty dangerous substance if you get in an accident. So we want to make sure that those things are mounted to the most up-to-date standards.
Yes, definitely agree, Mark.
So when we talked about the fact that the Congress has not really met since 2015, again, a lot of things have changed in the last 10 years. We had some very extensive discussion to the point where it was sent to the Technical Assistance Committee because, once again, our 15 minutes had run out, regarding the badging of electric school buses. Do you remember that discussion?
I do remember that. It's hard to forget, actually.
Yes, it is. So what ended up happening is the question was, to what extent do we need to be labeling things that are going to be hazardous for high voltage? How many of these little labels specifically marking this is high voltage are going to be on a bus? And then furthermore, what is the level that we need to be securing those? Do they need to be under lock and key? Are we going to have 50 different locked access points on a bus? Or would a screw be sufficient? And again, you can have a room full of 48 state delegations and you're going to have 24 different opinions. So it was great that we have a technical assistance committee. It's great that we have manufacturers of school buses who are there to actually share what the industry standards are, not just for school buses, but all electric vehicles in general. Yeah. Yep. So we had some good spirited discussion on that, but nonetheless, there are now standards that are put into this regarding the amount of labeling that you need to have on a bus, reminding people, hey, don't open this hatch unless you're prepared to be servicing a very high voltage line. So beyond that, we added an entire section on emerging technologies, which I think was a very wise decision. because we all want to take advantage of the new services and programs and softwares that are out there to try and make our jobs easier. But it's also real easy to spend a lot of money on the shiny new thing, and you find out in 3 years that that shiny new thing is not that fun.
Yeah, and we've talked about cost already, right? A couple times throughout this, right?
Yes, we have.
Mandating school districts to purchase optional equipment. That would be considered optional equipment now, could be cause a major hindrance for school districts. So technology. Imagine 10 years goes by, right? And we're talking about a lot of the language changes that could happen in 10 years. I can't think of anything that has changed more in a 10-year span than the technologies that we have, right? You look at the things that we even have at home. Televisions, for example, that were on the shelves 10 years ago are not even in existence anymore, right? So that transition also makes its way into our public school system, right? Our school bus is the same. So I just, we've just had the thought, it just continues to make me think that we can't force school districts to, purchase some of these flashy new equipment, as you call it. It makes it very difficult.
But what they did, what our writing committee did, was fantastic, I think, in terms of putting together a plan for if your eye does get caught by that shiny new equipment. Now all of a sudden there's a step-by-step process that they've laid out for you in terms of how to plan for your project, how to manage it, how to interview other districts who may have already implemented this and find out the pluses and minuses, and find out what sort of equipment or expertise you're going to need to have on your staff to pull off implementing this whole plan and procedure. And we actually did propose adding in there that when you're talking about all the things that you need to consider for criteria, we thought adding warranties was a good thing. So we supported that because, again, when you're looking at something that we've all seen things that districts could drop $100,000 on to add something new to their fleet. And if you're not looking at everything from the cost, the lifespan, and additionally the warranties, then maybe you're just throwing away money that could be better spent elsewhere within your department. So we were very thankful that a really thoughtful process was put together, not only to help you determine what to use, but then also even how to write that RFP up.
Yes.
So we supported that fully, and it did pass. And so we're glad that, again, the Congress is looking at things. It's not a static book. New sections can be added at any time. Well, not at any time, every 5 years, I guess.
Yeah.
But when that happens, we're willing to look and see what are things that our districts are struggling with, and particularly some of the smaller districts, because another aspect that was discussed there was even when you put together your committee, you're going to struggle to find somebody who actually has the technical expertise to know all of the things of what you're adding in there.
Yes.
So. One more thing that I thought was really key, and Troy, I think you can speak to how much Michigan has tried to be a leader in this area, is there's an entirely new section that was added for school transportation security and emergency preparedness.
Yeah, this is big, and not only from my work at the department, but my 2 decades plus spent in the K-12 public school system, right? So we have to understand that times are different now. Security measures that need to be taken now 10, 15 years ago probably wasn't even the case, right? So again, back to when we were, talking about maybe looking at things in a backwards way when we were talking about the handrails, for example, to see if maybe we had some students out there that needed access in certain ways. Security is almost the same thing. Do we have instances where a flaw in the system could potentially break down and we have certain students who could be at risk, right? So, I mean, my look at it from my work at the department is I want to make sure that our bus drivers are trained, right, in security measures. I can tell you firsthand that Katrina Morris at ESD, or that West Shore ESD, Tom Korth at Oakland Schools, I've been to his trainings that he puts on down there for his bus driver training for security measures, are absolutely fantastic. So I just, security in general is just extremely important to me.
Yeah, as we've learned looking through the continuing education programs that we've put out for all of school bus drivers across the state of Michigan over the last few cycles, we have really committed to making sure that our drivers know that there are steps that they can take for proactive responses. I know many of the transportation supervisors watching this have gone through an actual live drill of the proactive response training. It's a fantastic training. I really would recommend everybody try to get to one. I know it can be a bit challenging emotionally for some people because it is really getting our drivers and our supervisors to acknowledge the fact that, unfortunately, schools can become a target these days. And unfortunately, school buses need to be considered a target as well, as we've seen has occurred in the past. And so we just want to make sure that we are doing everything possible to keep our drivers safe, our students safe, everybody on the bus safe. And honestly, it would be best if we could identify those students early on and reach out to them so that we don't have to have those circumstances occur. So Troy, we tried to summarize a couple hundred pages worth of changes on a 600-page book in as fast as we could in a short amount of time. I know there are some people watching here who might still have some questions regarding what all comes out of the National Congress. So do you think we should open up the floor to ask them?
I do. Let's go ahead and go to the folks and see if we can get some questions answered. So, Mark, the question came through all these changes that are happening at NCST to this book. What does that mean? Like, are these now federal law that states have to follow? Do they not? So the question is, what do we really do with this new information?
So the National Congress is not, technically speaking, a binding legislative organization. However, they make recommendations that can be adopted by states on a state-by-state basis. And I think we discussed earlier, there are a handful of states who actually do adopt the entire manual as theirs. In the state of Michigan, we recognize that not everything within this manual is going to match up with what our needs are for our current population, our current climate and geography. So these are best practice recommendations, and a fair number of these do steer the legislation that governs pupil transportation within the state of Michigan. So it is crucial that you know what's in the book, that you have an idea of what those best practices are, because we want to follow the law, but we also need to recognize that there are reasons why we're not going to necessarily meet every standard that is a recommendation for the entire nation.
Well said, Mark. And in fact, I really don't have anything else to add more than that. It's tough, especially when we went 10 years between updating. We were left in a position where it was difficult to point our stakeholders to this document when we knew that there was so much updating that not only needed to be made, but we knew that were forthcoming. So I feel like now we're in a better position to where we can kind of point folks to this for best practices that are recommendations at the federal level. But obviously our people here in Michigan know that state law is what matters here in this case. So another question came through, Mark, that said this book that we keep referring to, the 600-page monster book that comes through by way of us going to the NCST Congress. Are other folks able to access this book? Is it public? Is it available for purchase? Can you just explain to to the folks how that works?
Sure, I will certainly try. So they have the book that's already been written, and it gets updated every time there is a Congress, so every 5 years at least, unless there's COVID, which, fingers crossed, let's not do that again. They're going through a process right now, and as we discussed, this was in May of 2025, so hopefully within the next few months, they will actually have all of the edits that we approved done, ready to go, ready for publish. And so, yes, that is a book that you can order online and you can have it delivered to you. And I do think that it is probably a very valuable resource to look into getting. Yes.
The question was in regards to alternate transportation. In really looking at 11 to 15 passenger vehicles, is there any type of federal legislation that goes along with that? Any any prohibitions, for example, looking at that? Can you speak to that at all?
I can speak to the fact that it's always fun to get hit with questions that you don't know in advance. What I'm going to say is this, Troy. I know the state of Michigan that governs all of our transportation clearly defines that a school bus is greater than 10 passengers. So if you are looking to transport someone in a vehicle that is more than 10 passengers in the state of Michigan, and I'm not going to speak to federal law on this one because I don't want to misspeak, but in the state of Michigan, you're either in a 10 passenger or less van or some other sort of vehicle, or you're in a school bus. That's it. That's what our law calls for. So if you want something that's greater, 11 passengers or greater, including the driver, you all out there, it's a school bus, period. You can't call something a van for 15 passengers and escape any sort of oversight. At that point, it is treated like a school bus and it's going to be inspected like a school bus, and it's going to fail because it's not a school bus.
I mean, in your opinion, Mark, do you feel like it's pretty cut and dry? It's easy to understand for our transportation folks?
I think it's cut and dry. I do think I've spoke to transportation folks who try to make it challenging to understand, but no, it's cut and dry. There's not middle ground in the state of Michigan, given our state laws right now.
Now, the beautiful thing with lawmaking is that we have the ability at the state level to make federal level more strict.
Yes, we do.
So in a lot of cases, there are federal legislation in certain areas, and states can manipulate that a little bit in making it more strict. So we do have a lot of circumstances here in the state of Michigan where we do so.